Welcome to What Now, an interview series brought to you by Michigan Future that asks, what are we learning today that will help us build prosperity for Michigan families tomorrow? I'm your host, Sarah Sherpicki, the Vice President of Michigan Future. In Michigan, almost half of our families can't afford basic necessities. The job market has changed significantly in the past 20, 30 years and continues to change with technology and AI at rates that we've never seen. So who knows what jobs will be available to our kids today in 10, 15, 20 years when they finish their education. We should be thinking about education in a new way. What is education's role that will allow our kids to be successful in an increasingly uncertain future? And yet, most schools look and feel the same way they did when you or I went to school, or even when our parents did. In this first What Now series on education, we're exploring ideas that will help kids build the type of skills they need in the future economy. Today, we're talking with Scot Graden, who recently retired as superintendent of Saline Public Schools. Scot, thank you so much for joining us today to talk.
Wonderful, thank you. Great to be here.
I was able to visit Saline a few years ago, and one of the things that we talked about a lot was the development of your learner profile, which really guides, it's in the actual shape of a compass and guides a lot of the design around your school and the sort of strategy. So can you talk about the process of creating that? Because I know it was a collaborative one.
Yeah, it was something that I think as a community in a district we were ready for, but we didn't really know it. And so, the conversation around Saline back in around 2008, 2009, as you recall, the economy was in terrible shape, but we had really, I felt like, refined a college entrance process where our students and families knew the pathway to achieve a certain GPA, to achieve a certain score on a standardized assessment and get to the college of their choice. And it was not focused on exploration. It wasn't even really focused on learning. It certainly wasn't focused on skill building. And so that really was the point at which we had to have a lot of conversation, because there was a lot of safety in that, and it worked. It was safe. We were getting what was seen as a proven result. And so the impetus or sense of urgency around change just wasn't there. So that took a lot of time to build.
And so why did you see the need for change if things were sort of comfortable?
Well, it was clear to me, and I came to education a little bit non-traditional, the community education background, and so I just to a point I viewed things a little bit differently at that time, and seeing and feeling the shifts that were happening in our economy, in our society. That was 12, 13 years ago now, and seeing that and feeling that, I got the sense that we needed to think differently. And there were teachers and there were a couple of administrators that were feeling the same way. And so it really was initially this idea of starting with a coalition of pioneers and the willing that said, hey, we can do better, we can think differently. Mastery learning and some of these other concepts were floating around. Competency-based education had floated around, and it was, how do we build something or pull something together that is meaningful for us as educators, but also that our families and students would respond to.
So talk a little bit about where you landed. What is a part of that sort of vision of who a learner is and what type of skills they're going to have when they leave you?
So the conversation started around kind of this idea of what are the building blocks of skill building and thinking before we got to the deeper components. And so that's where we landed on our 4 C's. It's communication, collaboration, critical thinking. And so I think that there's a scenario there where you start to say, if these are these bedrock foundational skills that are applied across virtually all content areas, then you can think about, okay, well, how do we enhance those, and what type of specific strategies do we use for those? And that's when we started to think about, okay, well, we need to integrate technology effectively. We need to think about the impact of space. Learning space became a big component for us. We needed our community to be a part of it, and certainly our instructional strategies needed to be a part. And so we started to layer what became a compass for us in that regard, with the 4 C's being the big points, and these strategies or elements of how we're going to approach that. And then the next layer for us became the attributes. And that was where we met as a community and developed what are the 8 attributes that we want to make sure our students know. And so when you think about global and or ethical and responsible citizen is one that we talked a lot about the last few weeks in early January. Because of what we saw at the national level, and thought about, that how important is it for us to make sure that our students are taught and engage in skill building around concepts like those attributes, and how more important those are than maybe a specific grade point average.
Did you encounter resistance, or was this people were excited?
If I reflect back, I can say everyone was excited and came very along, and that would be rose-colored glasses at this point. It was a challenge, and so it was a go slow to go fast scenario, and so we really started talking about these concepts in 2008, 9, 10, and the compass didn't get kind of formally adopted until 2016, and so there was a lot of work in that interim period there where we really had to build a case for it. We had to highlight the successes of it and really show kind of proof of concept a little bit around that. We also, in that window, engaged with an organization called Ed Leader 21. And as we had gotten into this work and we're kind of, these birds, we call it, the birds that flock together kind of thing. And so we found that there were probably a couple hundred districts across the country that were on that same journey and at various points. And boy, that felt good when we weren't, isolated in what we were approaching. We could look at other quality school districts across the country and kind of lended credibility to where we were going, as well as then what we were doing was helping to support. And so that was, I think, a key point for us from gaining credibility within our community, when we could point to districts across the country that were doing similar work, seeing successes. Some were ahead of us, some were behind us, but it was that was reassuring as well.
It seems to me that developing something like your compass is a little bit like getting to the question of what is the role of school? What should K-12 education be doing for kids? And that it's pushing a new answer to that question, which is the development of some of these skills. So did that feel like a big shift to people, or did it feel more like a series of tweaks?
I would say it was a shift. I think there's nobody in the community that doesn't that was around then that didn't feel like things were fundamentally changing. Our expectations for staff and what instruction looked like, what our buildings looked like physically, what we celebrated, those all changed in that period of time where we really were focused on it. Most people, this was a little bit of the Hippocratic oath when it's first do no harm. Our grade points didn't go down. Our college admission rates didn't go down. We just focused on other things. And lo and behold, our thought that, well, if we focus on these building block fundamental skills that can be applied across all content areas, as opposed to just teaching and drilling the content, building the ability to learn effectively and manage their own learning, in fact, has a better and even higher result. And so, I think parents were able to see, wow, this is better. I can, when you talk to adults about what's important, when you talk to employers about what they want to see, what made them successful, you can walk them down the path of, well, isn't this compass about that? Yeah. And almost to a person, it is. When you talk to people like, I'm a doctor. What did you always want to be? Well, no, I didn't want to be, and you get to a point where they can tell a story that they can find themselves and see themselves in our learner profile. And I think that's done a nice job of helping build support for it without feeling like, wow, Saline has gone too far and my child is going to not be able to be successful or achieve what they want to achieve.
Yep. I think one of the big questions that we always get when we're talking about making school a place where kids are developing a particular set of skills that are important today is, well, how are you going to ever know if they're developing those skills, because you can't put them on a standardized test. So how have you guys handled that?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. The assessment piece and how do we really show our student learning is critical, and has been something that we've spent a lot of time working on. And I think a lot of districts across the country who are doing this work, that's an area that we really want to collaborate on, because there's a lot to be done there. And so we use right now are using performance assessments which would be, people could think of as end of course, large story problems, multi-level problems. Sometimes they're worked on in small groups in order to assess skills. So it's not something that is going to be considered an exam, although it certainly functions as a demonstration of what a student learned and how they're able to exhibit their skills. And so it's very interesting to develop these because, one, they're very different. They're not typically taught in schools of education. So we have almost developed an education arm within our organization of teachers and instructional designers that help teachers learn how to assess in this way. And we do it by giving them performance assessments and really modeling their how do they learn and how do they exhibit their learning. And so that's a 4 or 5 year window of time where we develop them, refine them, practice them in order to get better. But that's a key point. I think that's an area over the next several years that we'll see some continued growth in. I think there's a growing number of districts that are getting better and better at performance assessments. And if we can get to a spot, or if districts can get to that spot, I think it's going to be a real win because parents will understand it and students will have the opportunity to practice and demonstrate their skills.
Are you giving, or are teachers giving students feedback on their skills? So, I was observing the work you did with your team, and I think you could have done X, Y, and Z to have collaborated a little better. Or how what kind of feedback are the kids getting?
Yeah, great question, and a key point, particularly early on in the district, when like 3rd, 4th grade, when we really start to get in. So we talk openly about the compass. We talk to students about the different attributes. We have scenarios where we explain the attributes. We have videos, or had videos where we would have individuals talking about what does it mean to be a global citizen? What does it mean to be digitally and financially literate? And so we had to explain the skills. And then we could talk about how do you feel you did in demonstrating those skills on certain assessments or projects or work. And so very explicit discussions around those skills, because I think it is about language and training our students and our staff to understand that the compass is there. It's always really been there. I think just becoming very explicit and valuing it. We talk a lot about the idea of what's on the plate. There's so much that we're expected to do in education these days, that what can we move off the plate? And what we've decided to say is that the compass really is the plate. There's not, hey, we're going to work on our skills and then we're going to work on academics and then we're going to do compass work. And that's early on. That's how I think our staff and even our administration, well, when are we going to do some compass work? Well, compass is the work. And so the sweet spot now is really when you're doing what I would consider to be somewhat traditional academic work, but you're doing it focused on skills, the way you do it changes. And that's where I talk about getting to the same end product of really high achieving students, but they're focused on a different area.
So what have you done to support, or what do teachers need in order to make that kind of shift where they're not thinking of these skills as like an extra you do during 15 minutes of class, but that the work becomes integrated? How does that change teaching?
Yeah, it takes time. Teachers, as a whole population, to label them, they're very much rule followers, and are typically people who want, if you tell them what to do, they will do it, and they'll do it well. And so you have to allow for some autonomy and freedom to do this work. And so it is a paradigm shift for many of our really excellent teachers to think, because if you tell them what to do, they'll find a way to do it. So now we had to kind of back up and say there are different ways to assess, there's different ways to learn. So we modeled it in our approach as leaders. We asked them to model it with each other in terms of how they go about their conversations around learning and development, and this idea of trial and error and failure is okay, and we're going to continue to work. And so in doing that, we had to acknowledge that our teacher evaluation systems needed to look differently. I'll be very honest, we de-emphasized teacher evaluation because there just wasn't a really, I think, a fair way for us to say, oh, we know so much about how to teach in this realm, we're going to evaluate it on it. We backed away and said, we're going to learn together. And I think that hopefully built trust in the staff. But it takes a lot of time to learn in this way. So, and the other thing is just stability. This wasn't something, hey, we're going to, implement it in 3 years after developing the compass, that the district said, hey, now we're going to focus on literacy across the areas. It was very much, the compass is embedded in everything we do. It's part of who we are, and it's not something where they feel like they're going to use it and then need to shelve it and do something else. And so that also builds, I think, a willingness to invest in the work.
Well, and if it's what you then were really committed to reinforcing constantly, right, it becomes relevant as opposed to like a plan that's on the shelf,
So in one of the things in one of them, about 4 or 5 years towards the end of my career, we used to always do highest honors banquet, and highest honors essentially honored our top 5% by grade point average at our high school. It's great to do that, but we were, in many ways, we're honoring the thing we say we don't necessarily value the same way. And so, and we did it where they would be honored, and they would pick an honored educator to be a part of that night. And so it was a really great celebration of teachers and students who did really, really well in our system. We added a level for our seniors called, we changed the name to Compass Night. We continued to honor those students that had achieved those high academic standards. We continued to honor educators, and we added a system where we have 8 students then that are honored as what we call them Compass Kids, and those students were chosen by the faculty, and each of the students most embodied the attributes. So the most creative student in the class would receive the Compass Award for that creativity and be honored for that. They may not have a particularly high GPA. They may have taken a lot of art and music classes, so they weren't in some of the other courses that tend to have weighted grades. And so there's ways for us to then honor the students that have really embodied those skills. Lo and behold, some of our Compass kids were also students that were part of our highest honors. And then those students wore, on graduation day, wore the Compass medal that we made. So they literally wore a nice medal. And again, we needed to start to symbolize the fact that that's what success looks like. Success looks like the student who's the most ethical and responsible person is voted on by the faculty in their grade level. And so, again, ways to celebrate and value those, I think, were important milestones for us as an organization.
So let's talk a little bit about how it layers over the systems that are sort of required by the state. Have there been policies that you've really had to like chafe at, or that have been barriers to sort of further implementing your vision here?
Well, now that I'm retired, I can say, we did kind of back away, and we certainly were looking to be compliant with a lot of, but we did not. I will like some of the school improvement planning processes don't fit well with this, and there's a lot of time. And so the one thing I would say, there weren't any specific policy hurdles that we couldn't get over, but there were ones we had to minimize, and ones that we had to really get to where we're going to check boxes, and we're going to be okay by saying we're not going to focus on that. And so certainly teacher evaluation is one that, the mandates around the process for teacher evaluation are onerous and cumbersome, and don't, in my mind, have a tangible benefit for us in that regard. School improvement process, the amount of time we spend with standardized assessments. And so I think what we find, if there could be policies and strategies in place, even if it's along the line of waivers and other things, to allow for more time to continue down, exploring in our case, our compass or our learner profile, investing in student skill development, as opposed to, okay, we need to stop and we need to do our compliance work right now, and then we're going to get back to doing what it would be that would be successful. And so I think down the road, these performance assessment, it'd be great if there could be a policy that would say, hey, we're gonna use a performance assessment as a measure of success for districts. I think that is kind of the next level that could really help districts and incentivize others. One of the things we're running into now is that there are some districts doing this work, and it's continued to grow and evolve. But there are many who, when we talk about what we're doing, what we were doing in Saline, it was almost a foreign language still. And so there's not a lot of networking able to be done at the state level, at least yet, for districts like Saline was.
I do remember when we visited, it felt like one of the things, and now this was like 5 years ago, maybe. So one of the things we saw that really struck us the most was this attempt to shift a lot of the work during class to the students. So it's not about the teacher explaining and the student like absorbing. It was, and we saw evidence of that at elementary, middle, and high school. So has that been like a prong of the approach for your teachers?
Yeah, that absolutely. It's really facilitating the learning as opposed to directing the learning. That the old idea and the sage on the stage is really not how we see it, what we see as the best strategy for our students to develop the skills. It really is a practice feedback model, as opposed to a sit, get, and then repeat in a sense, and reteach, and there's a lot of reteaching that goes on. There's a lot of small group one-on-one and direct instruction that goes. I don't want to give the impression that we're not providing direct instruction, but the cadence of it is very much focused on practice and feedback as opposed to delivering the information and then assessing whether or not they understood the information and reteaching gaps. And that's an older model, and one that I just don't think in the current environment allows for the type of success.
And then what are other, maybe especially at sort of the high school, but like kind of pedagogical shifts that you've made? So I think there's some project-based learning that's happening. CTE has changed for you guys. So talk a little bit about those types of changes.
So, project-based learning is really, there's group, what some of us back when we were in school would call it group work. It's deeper than that, and really thoughtfully designed project-based learning experiences go well beyond what we consider to be that group work piece. But and so it's multi-tiered in terms of the type of work we're asking students to do, levels of collaboration are expected to do, and then the other aspect that is then developing either individual courses that are different. Biomedical was one that we came up with and are doing now. We have an exercise and physiology course now where they really it's very much skill focused and very much experiment based, and those types of models are great. You mentioned CT, career and technical education, which you used to be almost have a stigma to it at times. Really has one, they've been doing a lot of this project-based work for a while. The real application of skills, you either can fix the car, you can't, kind of thing. And they've really embraced it. And what we've done is then also use those spaces. And so we have physics classes that go back and use the tire balancing machine in our auto shop to run experiments and tests. And so they're really trying to get across that content is content, but skills are the real value in terms of what can you do and how do you learn? You learn by practicing and trying, and then changing and making modifications to that. And so that's one that we continue to do. English, writing is one that you can do it with. Music has always been a very much a performance-based experience where they're going to do the concert for parents, and their parents, everyone in the room is going to know whether or not you did well. And so we tried to highlight opportunities for that in other areas as well.
Yeah. So as you talk about some of these things, part of what I'm thinking about is student engagement, which, I mean, that's something that in the ed world, people have cared about for a long time. But I think we're getting to deeper ways to engage them. And can you talk about the role that thinking about student engagement has played at your school or in your schools?
Yeah, that is an area that we've had a lot of conversation around. What does student engagement look like? We have students that can be looking right at the teacher. Are they engaged or are they not? You don't really know. And so what we've tried to do is figure out what are some of the strategies that tend to be engaging. I'll go back. I hate to keep going back to space. One is our rooms are flexible in the environment. We have, at our elementary level, we don't have enough hard surface chairs for the number of students in the classroom. And that's by design, because what we found is students want to be able to crawl under a tent. They want to be able to rock on a chair. They want to be able to move around. They want to be able to have a device that they can hold and go into an area of the building. And our teachers have been incredibly creative in terms of creating those spaces. And so I think when you think about engagement, it starts when the minute that the student walks into the space where they will be learning with their peers, and creating opportunities to know that what I find engaging in my learning is going to be different than what you would find. And so for us to say, well, we're going to have a really neat and tidy classroom because we want to make sure our students can focus and be engaged. Well, I don't maybe feel and value a neat and tidy. I need to be able to pull my hood up and go into a corner and do my reading. So when I come out, I can share what I've learned. So those are the things that we've tried to think about from a flexibility standpoint. We've tried to measure engagement. That's a hard one. That's another one that kind of along the performance assessment one, where I think districts are getting better at measuring engagement, and that I think further research and understanding there can help, particularly reach some students that we're struggling to reach at times.
Yeah. What have you tried? Are like observation rubrics, or just even if you don't feel like you have the answer yet, I'm curious what you've.
So it is observation rubrics that we've used to try to determine teachers can then assess. We ask for students to self-assess their level of engagement. That's been a one that we found probably at the 5th through 8th grade level, where students will be incredibly honest with you about whether or not they were engaged. Particularly when they know they're not going to be assessed on it. And so, we have, at the younger levels, we have a smiley face, a frown, and a flat face. And were you engaged today? And they have to pick one and start to get some. And so a little bit of it is training them to think about themselves as, hey, if I'm engaged, that's something that's important in talking about what does engagement look like. So there are some other studies that are out there around where you can have people analyze your classrooms. We have not they had not gone in that direction, but I think that may be something where I'd love to see more research done on that.
I know I spoke with Sarah Fine, who with Jal Mehta co-wrote In Search of Deeper Learning. And I thought it was interesting. She said, this is at the high school level. They would ask students, after what class, like, does your brain hurt in a good way? Sort of, so as opposed to asking, like, they were looking for rigor. And they said, if you ask what's hard, students often just say like their math class, or a class where they really have to memorize a lot of stuff. But when they asked them these sort of slightly different questions, like in what class are you thinking about class after you leave? It's like a different sort of proxy question. I thought was interesting.
Well, you bring up a great point around rigor, because rigor is something that I think parents and teachers tend to think of as being high quality. If you're in education, rigorous. In many ways, rigor is often then defined by more. You have to, instead of reading one chapter, in that book in honors, we read 3 chapters a night. Yeah. Is that rigorous? More rigorous? It's just more, and they're doing every other. And so we had to do a lot of work around what does real rigor look like, and that's where you had to get kind of to the Bloom's taxonomy, where you talk about really it is about applying those skills in challenging environments, as opposed to just saying we're going to just do more problems means more rigor.
So let's shift a little bit to talk about the current kind of moment. We've been talking sort of historically about Saline, and how you guys have pivoted to support kids during the coronavirus. So what are the basics, just to start with, in terms of in-person, virtual, like what's your situation?
So we, during that period of time, we really have, like everyone in the spring, we just tried to survive. And then once we got to the fall, and figuring out that we're going to be in this for a while, we did develop a multi-pronged approach. We do have a set of about 30% of our families that have chosen a fully virtual environment, and they will have that opportunity throughout the year. We have another group that wanted to go to gradual, what we called gradual in person. So we started fully virtual, and we did it for 2 reasons. One is we weren't sure whether or not school was going to be safe in fall. And so we wanted to see how that in our community, we're near University of Michigan and Eastern Michigan University. And so there was a sense of college students are going to come back and we're going to see case spike. And there was some of that, but so we started in that virtual, and also because we felt if we had to go out, meaning if we had to go fully virtual, for a period of time, we wanted to start with that so that we could get a cadence, learn from it, and then potentially be ready again. And it turned out to be the case. So we were able, by September 28th, we had what we call hybrid, every students every other day. So we were able to socially distance. We were able to, but we did get that in-person time for our students, and continue to value that. We did, as with everyone else, around Thanksgiving, we went out, and now I know in January we were able to get back to hybrid and certainly move forward, and we're hopeful where that goes in terms of getting to even more in person. And so we have continued to have that 30% fully virtual, and then we've had the students that have been gradual in person have gotten weeks of virtual, weeks of the every other day as well. And certainly been an absolute challenge and a test of flexibility for families, for students, for staff, for all of us.
So with the hybrid model, how did you think about what's the most important for us to do when we've got them in person?
Yeah. That did get to be, some of the, particularly at the younger levels, some direct literacy contact, and teachers have really said when they have them, that's what they want to work on. That's what they want to see. I'm most concerned for the group of students that are in school during that kind of that K-1-2, that group that's learning to read, because that's a pretty complex skill to do well. The students that have learned to read and are reading to learn, we're just at a different spot and better able to adapt to this environment. So that's been a critical part at elementary level. So when they're in person, the focus has been on that literacy piece. At the secondary level, I think it has been about personal responsibility. The rates of assignment completion within a period of time, meaning by a quote unquote deadline, when it was abysmal.
Yeah.
And so it really taught us that our students are oftentimes complying with assignment work or complying with things because they're physically there, or they know they will be physically present with their teacher. And that reciprocal accountability, when it's one thing for me to know I'm going to see Sarah tomorrow, and I need to turn in my assignment. That simple structure, I think, was artificially inflating the number of students that were completing the assignments. And so we really, and I've talked with other districts, they've seen this as well. So I think we've thought a lot differently now about student motivation, and it gets back to the engagement piece. So how do you, when you peel back some of these layers, what is really engaging, and to the extent that students are going to complete their work, or at least complete it so that they can get feedback on it.
So do you think that some of those lessons about motivation and engagement are things that you won't be in the district, but that the district or educators everywhere should be taking past COVID, like that will actually make school better, or could make school better if people think about it?
Yeah, I do feel like over time, I have fears around how education rolls out of the COVID pandemic, but I also have a lot of optimism about just those things: the idea of student motivation, the idea of teacher flexibility, the idea around really thinking about what challenges the students are facing outside of school, and how that applies to. I've seen our teachers be a lot more flexible with students in challenging environments than they were in the past. There's just a really almost like an empathy has developed, I think, in a different way. And I would hope that those are some things that continue in terms of understanding, and again, that flexibility around assignment completion, developing assignments and or tasks that are engaging to the extent that completion is not something that becomes a real issue, are important.
Well, there's that broad versus deep sort of balance, and the standards sort of require a certain breadth, and arguably students would be more engaged if they're allowed to go deep on something they were really interested in.
The one thing we found with this work, and that's one of the challenges we've had, is it's messy and it's hard, and there aren't necessarily, I'll go back to, we want to be rule followers. If we're, we grew up, if we're doing pages 32 to 42 today, and we knew what we were doing, the teacher knew, the students knew, and there was a lot of comfort in that. When you go down this other path, those structures go away, and now it's very uncomfortable for everyone, parents, students, teachers, administrators. And I think that piece of saying, but that's where the good work is done, and it's okay to be uncomfortable. That's a real learned approach that takes time.
Well, it's often said that like the adult culture in a school is the student culture. And so if the adult culture is one of just, check the boxes and obey the rules, then that's the sort of culture students experience. And if the adult culture is one of risk-taking, innovation, and experimentation, then that the students see that as well.
Yep, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think that it does begin with the adults in the organization in order to truly get to an environment where this type of learning can occur.
Yeah. So Scott, what else are you afraid of in terms of how schools and education sort of emerge from coronavirus?
One of the things I really do worry about is that there is going to be a back to basics focus in many districts. And I don't know, we're kind of buttressing ourselves against it, or we're in Saline, because I think we see it coming, is that there's this sense of students have quote unquote lost a lot of learning. And there's no doubt that the challenges presented by the pandemic have meant very different things to families. I would challenge the idea of loss of learning is that we've learned a lot, but it's different learning and resiliency and flexibility and dealing with disappointment and all these other things, feeling isolated and lonely. Those are things that, frankly, as adults are more important than some of the things they actually lost in terms of learning. But I fear that districts will, and I think public education, I think policy could go down this road of we need to do a lot of diagnostic assessment of our students at the end of the 21 school year, so that in 21-22 we can build back and we know what we need to, we're going to for policies around extra time I could see coming out of this, or we need to have extended school year to recoup the lost time and get back to very structured seat times and number of days and all kinds of conversations about how we're going to beat the pandemic educational learning loss and do it in these antiquated ways that actually make you want to talk about demotivating. Tell teachers and students coming out of a pandemic that we're going to have 195 days to help you better recoup from what happened last year. It would have the opposite effect. But I can see things like that, well intended, coming down the road.
Right. And telling them, well, we know you're in fourth grade now, but since third grade was kind of a wash, we're going to do third grade work.
I think
until you've achieved all those standards.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of those types of, again, natural, kind of what I would call these surface level responses to what has occurred that, could ultimately do more harm. We do need to know where our students are at from some, in certain areas. Sure. And we do need to have strategies to make sure that we're really spot on with our instruction over the next few years. But I would really hesitate from going too far down that road without it also celebrating, we all have learned a lot about what we value about about education, and let's do more of what we decided we value, as opposed to let's quote unquote get back to what the things that we were doing that we've now proven really had little to no value.
I've also been thinking about, as you were talking about, sort of the little ones who are like just developing literacy and numeracy skills, but they're also developing social skills. And if they've just been home seeing only their parents and siblings basically for a year, and you know what, this is true for high schoolers too. Forget it's not just little kids. Like, I feel for myself, like a certain awkwardness to engaging in the world. But when kids are really developing those skills. So do you have any thoughts about, as kids are coming back to school, how do we, we're going to need to help them actually shore up social skills that they were supposed to be building in the lost time?
Yeah, I think I'll give it 2 points. One is I think that issue was coming a little bit anyway in terms of digital connections that students and learning empathy skills and behaviors that typically would get worked out by second and third grade from a social standpoint, we're seeing in our fifth and sixth grade because they just haven't had the same type of socialization that they had. And so our strategies coming out of this, we've talked about having certainly open play, unstructured play, whether it be inside or outside. Focused a little bit in terms of maybe some different themes. So there is some we can kind of hang our hat on some learning, but truly play to be able to get a sense where they are interacting with peers without direct adult supervision. And I don't want to say it in a negative, unsafe way, but certainly have them be in spots where they're going to learn. They're going to be conflict. They're going to have to learn to play together. And because what we're seeing is situations where there's a group of students and you would come into it and I would say, Sarah, you can't play with us. That typically is almost a preschool-esque, lighter preschool. And by third or fourth grade, you've learned that that's socially hard. You have empathy to know that would hurt your feelings, and we work through that in many cases. We were starting to see even some of that starting to kind of get older and older between the parallel play, which typically happens in the younger preschool, eventually kind of goes away, and there's collaborative play. Parallel play was seemed like it was, and we're even in our environments right now with hybrid, we're seeing more of that. When it's unstructured time, there's conflict and there's less social engagement. And so I think we're going to need to just provide more time. I think we can catch up on that.
Yeah.
But I think those are things that we need to think about. And that goes back to, it's going to be harder to provide that time if we're saying, well, we need to reteach certain standards. We need to, that's some of the time conflict that I see coming out.
Well, is there anything else that you feel sort of hopeful this gives us an opportunity to rethink, or any positive trends you see?
Yeah, I think I do feel like there are. It'll be interesting to see how we react to once this idea of normalcy returns. But I've seen students get into elite colleges this last year without standardized test scores.
Mm-hmm.
We allowed our students were able to take the SAT in the fall if they wanted to, but many were already enrolled and stuff. And so, that's something that idea of, how you can't do it without this, colleges figured out if no one takes the test, we still need students. I mean, it kind of peeled back the curtain on some of these false premises that we've all collectively bought into. And I think that's good. The engagement of digital tools, the level and expertise and of ability for digital technology to help with education. I mean, literally, it has to have jumped ahead a decade. I've seen some science manipulatives that our teachers are using at the middle school level that are incredibly complex and I feel engaging. Those are things that our students are building atoms and learning and engaging with that, interacting with that digital. Those tools I think can applied when we don't have the restrictions around some of these other things, that could be a real over the next few years, a real positive. And I could also say, we're in Southeast Michigan. We have access to a lot. I'm picturing some of those tools in rural or isolated areas, or areas where students may not have access to the same type of resources as being a real leveler in ways that. So that's exciting to me as an educator.
So how do you temper that, though, with your earlier kind of concern about that we've moved so much to device-based learning that kids are missing out on developing important social skills? So how do you walk the balance, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm going to leave that to the next generation of educators. I think that really is the next, the next frontier, because we have these rich and really impactful and tools, but you have environments that they need to be applied with an appropriate level of use. And this is where this idea of you have these real powerful tools. Now we need to use them correctly and not overuse them. And I don't know the answer to that. I really do feel like will be a really important question for educators as we think about that the use of that technology, because that technology and those devices aren't going away. So how do you harness them appropriately, I guess is the term I would use. And I don't have any great theories on that, and I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's a way to still center the relationship that students have with adults, and that still needs to be key in some way. But
I think it's been interesting to see. I think what we've seen is that parents do see now the value of the relationship. Being separated from it, they now see the value of it, and not now. I mean, like we've always seen some of that, valued it. But I think so you get to that idea of if you can give a relevant student experience with a strong relationship to the teacher, and that the sky's the limit at that point.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you so much, and congratulations again on your retirement.
Thank you.
I hope you'll join us for our next episode featuring Lisa Diaz and Lisa Bergman of Renaissance Public School Academy.
The skills they learn in regards to collaboration and presentation and the confidence that comes from that, that will serve them way beyond if they go into nothing that has to do with water, right? Serve them forever in their life and in their pursuits.
We'd love to hear from you about how to make Michigan's education system work better for all kids. Please find us on social media.